spent 41 years recording the history of the Vethani crown. I have archived the names of their dead, the dates of their treaties, the weight of every crown ever placed on a Vethani head. I have sat in cold stone rooms and written down truths that other people found too painful to say out loud. But what I saw in the inner corridor of the royal compound on the night of the Orenti massacre, that is the one record I have been afraid to write. Until now, because if I do not write it, then no one will know what he did. And the galaxy will go on thinking that humans are nothing, just servants, just cargo, just the strange, soft, fragile creatures that the Galactic Compact brought in because they were cheap to feed and too simple to understand what they were working for. They were wrong about all of it. And the proof of that is a man named Cale Oren, a human, 29 years old, a station maintenance worker who had been assigned to the royal compound as a junior floor attendant, a servant, in every legal definition the compact recognized. A man who was supposed to mop corridors and carry supply loads and bow his head when Vethani nobility passed. A man who, on the worst night this station has ever seen, stood alone in a burning corridor with 2 royal children behind him and 37 armed soldiers of the Orenti fleet in front of him. And did not move. Set up Oris Station and the world of the compact. Let me explain what Oris Station is, because if you have never been this far out in the Lorne sector, you may not understand the scale of the place. Oris is not a ship. It is not a planet. It is the largest free-floating compound structure in the known sector, 3 kilometers of pressurized ring corridors, habitat domes, docking cradles, and power conduits wrapped around a central gravity column the size of a city block. From the outside, it looks like a spine with ribs of light. From the inside, it feels like a city that has been folded in on itself and told to hold its breath. The Vethani came here 40 years ago. They are a tall people, bipedal, long-limbed, with a secondary circulatory system that runs lavender blue under translucent skin when they are calm and dark violet when they are frightened or angry. They see in a broader spectrum than humans do. They hear lower frequencies. They live on average about 260 standard years, and they carry that longevity in their posture like a weight they have learned to wear gracefully. A Vethani elder standing still looks like a piece of architecture. The royal compound occupied the interior arc of Deck 12, the quietest, most shielded section of the station. 12-centimeter reinforced pressure walls, atmosphere filters that ran on triple redundancy, thermal regulation that kept every corridor at exactly 22.4 degrees Celsius, because that is the temperature at which Vethani children sleep most deeply. There were 14 guards assigned to the compound on a rotating schedule. There were surveillance nodes every 8 meters. There were 4 sealed pressure doors between the inner chamber, where the royal children slept, and the station exterior. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most protected locations on Oris Station. On the night of the massacre, every single one of those protections failed. I need to explain the machines, too, because this is a story that happens inside a machine, or rather, inside the collapse of machines, and you need to feel what that collapse sounds like from the inside. Oris Station runs on a distributed neural lattice power grid. Think of it as a web of interconnected nodes, each one feeding energy to a local zone, each zone feeding into the next. The whole thing managed by a station-wide AI called the Oris Governance Mind, or AGM. The AGM monitors 4,400 individual systems simultaneously. It manages atmosphere, gravity plating, heat exchange, docking protocols, emergency shielding, life support zoning, and about 9,000 other things I am not qualified to name. It speaks to station personnel through small terminal panels in the walls, pale blue screens with a calm, androgynous voice that says things like, Sector 7 Lorne reports nominal pressure, or Docking Cradle 4 is accepting a Class 3 freighter. When the AGM goes silent, you notice immediately, not because an alarm sounds, though alarms do sound eventually. You notice it the way you notice when a person in the room with you stops breathing. Something that was there is suddenly not there, and the absence is louder than the thing itself was. That silence came at 02:17 station time on the 14th of the 4th cycle. I was in the archive room on Deck 11, one level below the royal compound, updating the genealogy records for Prince Sarath and Princess Lane, the Queen's 2 children, ages 9 and 6 by Vethani reckoning, which places them roughly equivalent to 4 and 3 in human developmental terms. Very young, very small. At that age, Vethani children sleep in pressurized cradle pods because their secondary circulatory systems are still calibrating. The lavender blue under their skin pulses visibly when they dream. I had been working for about 2 hours when the lights dropped to half power. A moment later, the AGM's ambient hum, a very low sound, like a building thinking, stopped. And then I heard the first distant explosion. Build the night it happened. The Orenti had been planning this for a long time. That part came out later in the tribunal records, and I will not go into all of it here. What matters for this story is what they did and how fast they did it. The Orenti are a compact species, smaller than Vethani, denser, with thick-plated exoskeletal shoulders and eyes that sit wide on a broad, flat face. They have been in a sovereignty dispute with the Vethani crown for 11 standard years over the resource corridors in the outer Lorne Belt. 11 years of negotiation. 11 years of failed compacts and withdrawn ambassadors and diplomatic communiques that got angrier with each exchange. On the night of the 14th, they stopped negotiating. 17 Orenti vessels dropped out of fold transit at the edge of the Oris exclusion zone at 0209 station time. The AGM flagged them as unregistered. The station's docking authority attempted contact. The Orenti responded by firing a localized electromagnetic disruption pulse, a weapon that the compact technically prohibits but that everyone knows the Orenti have been developing for 6 years. The pulse did not destroy anything. It did not need to. It simply reached through the AGM's distributed network like a hand reaching into water and closed around the central coordination node and squeezed. The AGM went dark at 0217. Without the AGM, the station's automated defenses became disconnected from targeting data. The sealed pressure doors lost their electronic locks and defaulted to manual-only operation. The surveillance nodes went blind. The atmosphere systems shifted to local backup generators, which are slower and less precise. The gravity plating in the outer ring dipped by about 8%, which sounds small but which, in practice, means that loose objects lift slightly off surfaces and footsteps become lighter, and the whole station takes on a faint, dreamlike quality that is deeply disorienting if you have not trained for it. The 14 guards assigned to the royal compound were not all present. 4 were off rotation in the crew quarters. 3 were stationed at the outer docking level. The remaining 7 were inside the compound, and of those 7, 3 were killed in the first 60 seconds by the Orenti strike team that came through the maintenance corridor on the east side of Deck 12. The Orenti had the schematics. They knew the corridors. They knew the rotation schedule. Somewhere in the preceding months, someone had sold them everything they needed. I did not know any of this as I crouched in the archive room with my back against the wall and the lights flickering and the sound of weapons fire coming through the ceiling above me. I knew almost nothing. I knew there was an attack. I knew the royal compound was directly above me. I knew the Queen was not in the compound. She had left at 20:00 for a meeting with the Sector Trade Council on the station's upper deck, a meeting that the Orenti timing had clearly accounted for. And I knew, because I had checked the assignment roster 2 days earlier when updating the staff records, that the only station employee assigned to the inner corridor that night, the corridor immediately outside the children's chamber, was a 29-year-old human floor attendant named Cale Oren. I knew what that meant, or I thought I did. A floor attendant. No weapons, no armor, no combat training on record. A human, which in Galactic Compact law placed him in the Category 3 servant classification. A designation that existed partly for labor regulation, and partly, if we are being honest, because the older member species of the Compact had not fully decided what to make of humanity yet. Category 3 servants were legally prohibited from carrying energy weapons on station property. They were not permitted in tactical briefings. They were not permitted to restrain or detain any sentient being of Category 1 or 2 classification, without direct authorization from their assigned supervisor. Cale Oren did not have a supervisor present. His supervisor, the compound's head of household staff, had gone off shift at 22:00. He had no weapon, he had no armor, he had no authorization. He had no backup. He had a mop handle, as it turned out, and a floor maintenance trolley, and 2 sleeping royal children in the room behind him. That was it. Build what I saw and what I didn't. I made it to the inner corridor about 40 minutes after the attack began. I should not have been there. I should have stayed in the archive room or taken the emergency evac route to the station's lower decks like the notification system, running on backup power, crackly and half-translated, was telling me to do. But I was the compound historian. Those children were in my records. I had written their birth dates and their naming ceremonies, and the small, careful notes about their developmental milestones that the Queen had shared with the archive office. Sarath liked the sound of the station's ventilation system, and had named the sound he heard in it, the Great Breathing. Lane had a favorite cradle toy, a small woven figure of a Vethani water bird, and she held it in her fist while she slept so tightly that when attendants checked on her they could see the impression of the toy's wings pressed into her palm. I could not stay in the archive room. I took the maintenance access shaft between decks 11 and 12. It runs parallel to the east wall, and it is narrow and dark and smells of old coolant and recycled atmosphere. I moved through it slowly, using the emergency lighting, small red nodes set every 2 meters into the wall to guide myself. I could hear the weapon's fire clearly now. It had the particular sharp crack quality of Orenti breach rounds, which are designed to punch through pressure walls. Every time one fired, I felt it in my chest before I heard it with my ears. I reached the access hatch for Deck 12's inner ring at approximately 03:05 station time. I know the time because I had a personal recorder running in my coat pocket, habit of an archivist. I have never been without one, and the recorder logs a timestamp every 30 seconds. I opened the hatch very carefully, maybe 3 centimeters, enough to see. What I saw, I have been trying to describe accurately for 3 years now. I have written it and crossed it out and rewritten it more times than I can count. Not because I do not remember it. I remember it perfectly, in the way you remember things that you have no choice but to remember. But because every time I try to describe it, the words feel too small for what was actually there. Let me try again. The inner corridor of the royal compound is about 30 meters long. It is wider than the access shafts, wide enough for 2 Vethani adults to walk abreast with room to spare. The walls are a pale cream composite, and the lighting in normal operation comes from a continuous strip running along the junction of wall and ceiling, casting an even, warm light that the children find soothing. On this night, the main lighting was dead. The backup power had activated a series of emergency floor-level strips, blue-white, functional, cold. That lit the corridor from below, so everything was shadow-heavy and strange, the way things look in dreams or underwater. At the far end of the corridor, the end that faced the outer section, the direction the Orenti were coming from, there was a barricade. I say barricade. I mean a floor maintenance trolley pushed on its side, with supply containers stacked against it, and 2 equipment lockers dragged from the wall and positioned to create an overlapping barrier approximately 1.5 meters high and 2 meters wide. Behind the barricade, in the narrow gap between the barrier and the sealed door of the children's chamber, stood Cale Oren. He was wearing his station-issue attendant uniform, the pale gray one with the small Vethani crown insignia on the left shoulder. It was not designed for anything except looking presentable in the corridors of a royal household. He had no helmet, no body armor. His hands were visible above the top of the barricade, and he was holding the long handle of a maintenance implement, one of the extendable floor cleaning poles about 2 meters long, made of lightweight composite material. It was not a weapon. It was never designed to be a weapon, but he was holding it like one. And in front of him, at the other end of the corridor, advancing through the cold blue floor light, were soldiers. Orenti soldiers. I counted them twice through the gap in the hatch because I did not believe the number the first time. 37. Not a small strike team. A full tactical contingent, in full combat configuration, plated shoulder armor, visor-masked helmets, breech-round rifles raised and active. The kind of force you send when you want to leave no question about the outcome. They had stopped. I do not fully understand, even now, why they stopped. They could see he was alone. They could see he was unarmed in any meaningful sense. They could see the barricade was constructed of cleaning equipment and storage containers, not a military fortification, not even a serious physical obstacle for 37 armed soldiers. They should have walked through it without breaking their formation. But they had stopped, and the one at the front, a senior Orenti officer, recognizable by the gold-plated shoulder insignia and the rank light on his visor, was speaking. I could not hear the words clearly from where I was. Later, when the station's backup audio logs were recovered, we got the transcript. I will come to that. What I could see, and what I will never stop seeing was Cale Oren's posture. He was not shaking. I want to be very clear about that because when I tell this story to people who were not there, they often ask, was he scared? And the answer is, of course, he was scared. He was human. He was 29 years old. He was standing between 37 armed soldiers and 2 sleeping children with a mop handle in his hands. You would have to be something other than alive not to be scared in that position. But he was not shaking. His back was straight. His feet were set shoulder-width apart, one slightly forward, the way a person stands when they have decided not to move and they mean it. His grip on the pole was loose enough that his hands were not white, but firm enough that it was clear he was not going to drop it. He was looking at the officer at the front of the formation, and he was not looking away. That stillness, that specific, deliberate stillness, that is what stopped them. I believe that to this day, not the barricade, not any calculation about the military threat he posed, which was none. It was the stillness. There is something in the way humans hold themselves when they have made an absolute decision that reads, even across species lines, as something different from ordinary defiance. It reads as a kind of gravity, like the person has become very briefly immovable, not because they cannot be moved, but because they have decided they will not be, and that decision is so complete it has become physical. The Oreni officer had been in 36 tactical operations. I read his service record in the tribunal files afterward. He had commanded forces against Vethani military units, against Keth border guards, against 3 different resistance groups in the outer sectors. He had never, in 36 operations, stopped a formation because of a single unarmed individual. He stopped this one. "What are you?" the Orenti commander said, not a threat, not a question of challenge. It came out, according to the audio log, sounding almost uncertain, like a person asking a question they had not expected to find themselves asking. Climax, the human and the galaxy's soldiers. The audio log transcript runs to 47 lines. I have read it probably 200 times. I will give you the part that matters. The Orenti commander, his name from the tribunal record, was Commander Hetash Vorn, said, "Move aside. We have no designation for your type in this operation. Move aside and you will be logged as a non-combatant and left unharmed." Cale Oren said, "No." Just that one word. In Galactic Standard, which he spoke without an accent, which surprised Vorn enough that you can hear the pause in the audio log, a full 2-second gap between Cale's response and Vorn's next line. 2 seconds in a military operation is a long time to pause. Vorn said, "You are a Category 3 civilian. You have no standing here. You are not authorized to impede this operation. Step aside or I will order my soldiers through that barrier. You cannot stop us." Cale Oren said, "I know that." Another pause, longer this time, 3 seconds in the log. Vorn said, "Then why are you still standing there?" And Cale Oren said, "Because those are children." That is the line I come back to every time, because those are children. Not because I have orders, not because it is my duty. Not any of the reasons a soldier would give, any of the institutional reasons, any of the reasons that fit inside a report or a legal framework or a tactical calculation. Just because those are children. The formation held for another 30 seconds. 30 seconds is an eternity in a tactical operation. I was watching through the gap in the hatch, and I could see the soldiers in the rear of the formation shifting their weight, looking at each other, looking at their commander, looking back at the single human standing behind a cleaning trolley with a pole in his hands. I could also hear, in a gap between weapon fire from other parts of the station, the very faint sound of a child coughing. The backup atmosphere system was less precise than the main one, and the air quality in the children's chamber had dropped slightly. Lane, I'm almost certain it was Lane, she was the smaller one, and she was more sensitive to atmosphere fluctuations, had coughed in her sleep. A small sound. The kind of sound that would not have been audible at all under normal conditions. Cale Oren heard it. I saw him glance back at the door for one fraction of a second. And then he turned back to face Vorn, and he was still not shaking, and his feet were still set. Vorn gave an order. I could not hear the specific words. The audio quality degrades at that point in the log, but the formation moved. Not forward, sideways. Vorn split the formation into 2 flanking groups, sending 15 soldiers to try the service corridor on the left side of the inner ring and 14 to the right, keeping 8 at the center with himself. It was a standard encirclement maneuver. bypass the focal obstruction, surround from multiple angles, reduce the barrier's relevance. Standard, and it would have worked completely if the service corridors on either side of the inner ring had been navigable. They were not, because sometime in the preceding hour, Cale Oren had been busy. The maintenance logs recovered later showed the sequence. After the AGM went dark at 02:17, Cale had approximately 3 minutes before the Orenti strike team reached Deck 12. In those 3 minutes, while the station was losing power and weapons fire was starting in the outer sections, and there was no communication and no backup and no instruction from anyone, he had done the following. He had manually sealed the 2 service corridor access points on either side of the inner ring using the emergency pressure clamps, heavy magnetic locks designed for atmosphere emergencies, requiring a physical key code sequence to operate, a sequence that is standard in all maintenance training, but that most staff use perhaps once in a career. He had closed and manually bolted the outer pressure door between the inner corridor and the main compound atrium. He had moved every piece of heavy equipment within reach, trolleys, storage lockers, supply containers, into the inner corridor and arranged them into the barrier I had seen. And he had done all of this while also checking on the children twice. The logs showed 2 brief entries to the children's chamber, presumably to confirm they were still sleeping and to check the atmosphere readings on the cradle pods. 3 minutes, all of that in 3 minutes. The Orenti flanking teams hit the sealed service corridors and found them locked from the inside pressure clamp locks that require either the original key code or approximately 4 minutes of sustained breach-round fire to defeat. The Orenti had breach rounds. They had the firepower. But 4 minutes is a long time when something is happening at the center that is taking all of your commander's attention. And at the center, Commander Vorn was looking at a human being who had not moved. Vorn stepped forward from his remaining 8 soldiers. Alone. He walked to within 3 meters of the barricade and stopped there. I had a direct sightline through the hatch to this. I could see both of them clearly, Vorn and Cale, separated by a pile of cleaning equipment and approximately 1.5 meters of corridor space, and something else that did not have a name in any language I know. Vorn said, and I have the audio clearly for this part, the log is clean. You understand what I can do to you? Cale Oren said, yes. Vorn said, you are one person. You are not a soldier. You are not a guardian. You are a maintenance worker. What you are doing right now is not going to change anything. And Cale Oren said, and I have read this line in the transcript until the words have stopped looking like words to me. I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just not leaving. What happened next I have also read in the tribunal record, and I have also seen in the partial visual log footage that the backup surveillance node on the east wall managed to capture before its power failed. But seeing it in footage is different from seeing it live, and I saw it live through a 3-centimeter gap in a maintenance hatch, and I will describe it the way I saw it. Vorn raised his weapon. A standard Orenti service arm, short-barreled, high-yield, the kind that leaves nothing to reconstruct. He aimed it at Cale Oren's chest. Cale Oren looked at the weapon, and then he looked at Vorn, and he did not move. He did not raise the pole. He did not step back. He did not say anything. He just looked at Vorn with his feet set and his back straight and his hands on the pole, and he waited. I think in that moment, Vorn expected him to break. I think everyone in that corridor expected him to break. The 8 soldiers at Vorn's back, the flanking teams working on the sealed corridor locks, whatever small part of the station's damaged surveillance was still watching. I think the entire weight of galactic military logic expected him to break. Because he had nothing, no armor, no weapon, no cavalry coming, no chance, and every species in the compact, when presented with nothing, tends to reassess its position. Cale Oren was not every species. He stood there, he waited. And Vorn, Commander Hetash Vorn, 36 operations, winner of the Orenti Tactical Commendation 3 times, held the weapon trained on his chest for 11 seconds. I know it was 11 seconds because the audio log captures it exactly. 11 seconds of silence between Cale Oren's last word and the next sound on the recording. In the tribunal, 3 different analysts listened to that 11-second gap and tried to explain what was happening in Vorn's decision-making process. None of them fully agreed. The Orenti psychologist who testified called it a threshold resonance failure, meaning Vorn's operational framework encountered something it could not categorize and the system stalled. The human behavioral expert called it simpler. She said he was looking at someone who was not afraid to die for something, and it made him ask himself whether he was ready to do the thing that came next. He lowered the weapon. Not completely. He did not stand down. He did not signal a retreat. He lowered the weapon to a carry position, and he turned back to his formation, and he spoke quietly to the soldier nearest him. And then this part I did not understand until much later. He looked back at Cale Oren one more time. Just looked, for about 2 seconds. And then the sound that ended everything came through the station. It is described in the technical logs as a Class 1 emergency override broadcast, a signal that the station's AGM can issue when it detects an active attack on a registered diplomatic or sovereign compound. The AGM had not been fully destroyed by the Orenti pulse. It had been stunned, essentially. The central coordination node had gone dark, but the distributed subnodes had been slowly rerouting, rebuilding a partial operational framework in the 38 minutes since the pulse hit. At 03:08 station time, enough of the network had rebuilt itself that the AGM could issue a single action. It chose the Class 1 broadcast. The sound that comes with it is, there is no other word, enormous. It is not just a sound you hear. It is a sound you feel in your teeth and your joints and the back of your eyes. Every speaker node in the station activates simultaneously, and the broadcast carries through atmosphere and through hull material and through the pressure walls. And what it says, in galactic standard and in every member species language and in the emergency frequency that all military vessels in the sector are legally required to monitor, is this: Compact Article 9 violation in progress. Sovereign compound under armed assault. All compact enforcement vessels respond to coordinates Oris 7 Lorne Interior. Responding forces have weapons-free authorization. The Orenti soldiers heard it, every one of them, and they knew because any species that operates inside the compact knows what it meant. Compact enforcement vessels are not slow. They do not negotiate. They do not accept the terms of an operation already in progress. They arrive and they end things, and the manner in which they end things is not something that favors the side that is standing inside a sovereign compound with weapons raised. Vorn gave a new order. The flanking teams abandoned the sealed corridor locks. The 8 soldiers at the center reformed into a withdrawal column. And the Orenti contingent, 37 soldiers, full tactical unit, the force that had come to this corridor intending to leave no loose ends, turned around and began moving back toward their breach point. They left the way they came in, quickly. They left because the compact enforcement ships were coming. They left because the tactical calculus had changed. They left for 100 completely logical, completely military reasons. But I also believe, and I am an archivist, I deal in things I can prove, but this is the one thing I cannot prove and still believe absolutely, that some part of what made them leave was what they had seen in that corridor. What they had stood in front of for 11 seconds with a weapon raised. A human being who would not move. Who had nothing and knew it, and had decided that knowing it was not sufficient reason to leave. Because those are children. Resolution when the Queen came home. The Queen arrived at 04:33 station time. Her name is Sovereign Ethai's Vethani Crown, and she had been escorted back to Oris Station by a contingent of compact enforcement officers under emergency protocols. She had been told, in transit, that her compound had been attacked. She had been told that the Orenti had been repelled. She had been told that her children were safe. She had been told this multiple times by multiple people because she kept asking, and the people telling her were not sure she was processing it through the shock. She came into the compound at a pace that I would describe as controlled urgency, the Vethani version of running, which looks like very fast walking to a human observer but which covers ground quickly, and which, in someone of her height, is somewhat alarming to watch approach you in a narrow corridor. I was standing near the entrance to the inner ring by this point. The compact enforcement officers had arrived 20 minutes earlier, cleared the station, confirmed the Orenti withdrawal, and begun securing the breach points. I had come out of the maintenance hatch. My legs had been shaking. I noticed this with some detachment, the way you notice things about your own body when you have been very frightened, and the fright is only just beginning to catch up with you. The Queen came past me without stopping. I do not think she saw me. I do not think she was seeing much except the door at the end of the corridor. And then she stopped, because Cale Oren was still there. He was sitting on the floor, His back was against the sealed door of the children's chamber. The barricade was still in place. No one had moved it yet. The pole was on the floor beside him. He had his knees up and his arms resting on his knees, and his head was tilted back against the door. His eyes were open. He was looking at the ceiling. He had not moved from that spot since the Orenti left. I know this because I had been watching since I came out of the hatch. For 38 minutes, while the enforcement officers arrived and the station systems came back online, and the lights returned to full power, and the corridor went from cold blue emergency lighting to warm, normal illumination. Through all of that, Cale Oren had sat on the floor in front of the children's door and looked at the ceiling. He was not injured. He was not in shock exactly, not the clinical kind. He was just very tired. The kind of tired that comes after a very long period of holding yourself at complete attention and then suddenly not needing to anymore, when everything you were bracing for does not come, and the body starts to notice all the things it had been ignoring. The Queen stopped about 2 meters from him. The enforcement officers who had come in with her stopped behind her. I stopped where I was. Cale Oren had heard her approach. He lowered his head from the ceiling and looked at her. And I want to be precise about what I saw in his face at that moment because I have thought about it often. He did not look relieved. He did not look proud. He did not look like someone waiting to be thanked or recognized or assessed. He looked like someone who had done a very specific thing that needed doing and was now very tired and was waiting to be told what came next. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the barricade, at the cleaning trolley and the equipment lockers and the supply containers, at the pole on the floor beside him, at the sealed door behind him. She took all of this in, very slowly, the way a person takes in something they need to understand fully before they respond to it. Then she looked at him again and she said, in galactic standard, which she speaks with the slight formal precision of someone for whom it is a second language, "My children, are they safe?" Cale Oren said, "Yes, sleeping. The atmosphere in the chamber dropped a few points around 0300. The backup system is less precise, but it stabilized. I checked the pod readings every 15 minutes. Lane coughed once. She didn't wake up." The Queen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you, are you hurt?" He seemed slightly surprised by the question, as if it had not occurred to him to track that particular variable. He looked at his hands. There was a small cut on his left palm from something, a sharp edge on one of the equipment lockers probably, and then back at her. "No," he said, "I'm fine." She looked at him for another long moment. Her secondary circulatory system, the lavender blue under her skin, was pulsing dark violet, which is the frightened color, the urgent color, which meant that the full reality of what had almost happened was still moving through her in waves. But her voice was steady. She said, "I was told what you did." He said, "I didn't do very much." And something in her expression shifted then. Not dramatically. The Vethani are not a dramatically expressive people. Their faces carry emotion the way deep water carries current, visible if you know what to look for. But I had been recording Vethani emotional expression for 41 years, and I know what I saw. What I saw was not gratitude exactly, though it was that too. What I saw was something closer to recognition, like a person who has carried a long, complicated belief about something and has just received evidence that they were wrong, not in a bad way, in the way that makes the world larger than you thought it was. She lowered herself. I want to be careful how I describe this because I do not want to make it sound like a dramatic theatrical gesture because it was not. It was slow and deliberate, and it was clearly not something she had planned. The sovereign of the Vethani crown does not kneel in corridors. It is not a thing that happens. There is no record of it in 40 years of crown documentation, and I have read all of it. But she lowered herself, there in the inner corridor, in front of a human maintenance worker who was sitting on the floor with a cut on his hand and his back against her children's door. And she placed one long-fingered hand on the floor next to him, not touching him, just near. And she said, "Tell me your name." He told her. She said it back to him. "Cale Oren," 2 words, said the way you say a thing you intend to remember. Then she stood, and she looked at the enforcement officers and the compound staff who had gathered in the corridor entrance, and she said, in a voice that I have tried to capture exactly in the archive record, "This person is to be reclassified immediately. Whatever category he is currently assigned, he is no longer that. Get me the Compact's classification review board on a priority channel. I do not care what time it is." One of the enforcement officers started to say something about the standard review process, about the timeline, about the forms. She looked at him and he stopped. She looked back at Cale Oren one more time. He had put his head back against the door again. He was looking at the ceiling again. He looked honestly like he might be about to fall asleep. "The children will want to see you when they wake," she said. "Lane especially. She will want to know who was outside her door." He did not say anything, but he nodded once slowly, and the corners of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was something in the direction of one. The Queen went to her children. I stood in the corridor and the lights were back to full warm power, and the AGM's ambient hum had returned, low and constant, like a building thinking. And somewhere beyond the pressure walls, the compact enforcement vessels were escorting the Orenti fleet out of the exclusion zone, and the station was beginning the long process of counting what it had lost and what it had not. What it had not lost were the children of the Vethani crown. Because a man with a mop handle and a maintenance trolley and 3 minutes and an absolute decision had stood in front of the thing that was coming for them and said, "I am not leaving." I filed this account in the Crown Archive on the 31st day after the Orenti attack. It sits beside the official incident report, the tribunal records, the AGM system logs, and the Classification Review Board's decision, which, for the record, took 19 days to finalize and resulted in Cale Oren's reclassification to Compact Category 1, full civic standing, with a specific notation in the legal text that I helped draft. The notation reads, Informal Galactic Standard. Classification amended in recognition of conduct that demonstrated without ambiguity that the capacity for sovereign-level duty is not species-dependent. That is the official language. It is accurate. It is also, I think, much too small for what it is trying to say. What it is trying to say is this: the galaxy had a category for humans. It had placed them in it carefully with reasons that seemed to the species that created the category like common sense. Humans were new. Humans were fragile by the standards of most compact species. Humans had not yet demonstrated the kind of historical depth, the kind of long civilizational record that the older species used as evidence of trustworthiness. Category 3, servants, managed. Watched, permitted to be useful within clearly defined limits. And in a corridor on Deck 12 of Oris Station, with the AGM dark and the guards dead, and the station burning in sections, and no category on any compact form that described what he was doing, a human being demonstrated what the galaxy's categories had failed to account for. He demonstrated that there is a kind of decision that does not require training, or armor, or orders, or the acknowledgement of any institution. A kind of decision that a person makes alone, in the dark, when everything that was supposed to protect has already failed, and the only thing left is the question of whether they are going to step away from the door. Cale Oren did not step away from the door. And 3 years later, when I look at the archive entry for Princess Lane, 9 years old now by Vethani reckoning, and she still holds her woven waterbird so tightly when she sleeps that you can see the impression of the wings in her palm, I think about what is not in the record, what the record cannot hold. The way he sat on the floor with his back against her door and his head tilted up and his hands open after all of it was over, not watching the corridor anymore, not standing guard. Just sitting there, like he needed to stay close just a little while longer, just until he was sure. The galaxy had a word for what Cale Oren was. It turned out the word was wrong. Not because the galaxy was cruel, but because it had never had the chance to watch a human decide what they were willing to stand in front of alone in the dark, with nothing in their hands but a thing that was not a weapon, and a reason that was not a reason the Compact had ever thought to write into law. The category they gave him after was better, but even that one does not quite fit. Some things are too specific to a moment, too particular to a person, to belong to any category at all.